Nobody foresaw that Chuck Norris would return to that quiet stretch of suburban America where strip malls dotted the landscape, but he drove in one late afternoon with a storm of purpose raging inside him. He had caught word through a friend that Master Lee's venerable dojo was set to be bulldozed, which caused an instant jolt of memory. He remembered sprinting across the small courtyard years ago with his heart pounding and his breath short, because he had been just another hopeful kid wanting to learn the art of discipline. He had listened with wide eyes to Master Lee's instructions. He had bowed respectfully each time Master Lee demonstrated a precise kick. He had soaked up every ounce of guidance that echoed in that old dojo's wooden floors and creaking rafters. Now the place was in danger of being reduced to rubble, which felt almost unthinkable, yet the grim reality was that local developers wanted to wipe the slate clean and build something modern. Therefore, Chuck knew he couldn't let that happen. People whispered that the area was too far gone for nostalgic rescues, but he refused to believe it. The day he arrived, the sky glowed orange, and he stood outside those battered double doors that bore the marks of thousands of students who had come through in search of discipline, hope, or maybe just a sense of purpose. Master Lee, now well into his 70s, emerged to greet him. His movements were slower, but there was the same intensity in his gaze, the same upright bearing that suggested he could still teach men half his age a lesson or two. Chuck offered a respectful bow. He saw tears pooling in the old master's eyes. Master Lee was known for his stoic composure, but the news of the demolition had shaken him. He remembered how Master Lee used to say that a dojo was more than a building. It was a living monument to perseverance and respect. Chuck recalled how this very place had once been the training ground of his own late mentor, a man who taught him that the meaning of strength was not in muscle alone but in moral character. But times had changed. Real estate in the area had soared, and big money had drawn up plans to raise the building. Chuck gritted his teeth. He understood that commerce was unstoppable in many cases, therefore he planned to use every resource he had to preserve this piece of history. After stepping inside with Master Lee, he realized how dire the situation was. Windows had cracks. The roof needed repairs. The paint on the walls peeled in long strips. Yet the old trophies, photographs, and weapons displayed around the main training floor still carried an aura of pride. Master Lee explained that despite his attempts to modernize, the dojo never turned into some flashy martial arts franchise. He preferred the traditional approach and believed in teaching sincerity rather than marketing gimmicks. Because of that, the income was modest, and he fell behind on taxes. Developers swooped in after hearing that the land was available at a bargain price. Chuck listened without flinching, but inside, he felt his outrage flare. He placed a strong hand on Master Lee's shoulder and promised him that he would not let them take it away without a fight. The next day, Chuck launched into action. He made phone calls to old friends who had once trained within those walls. Some were scattered all over the country, but many responded instantly when they heard the dojo's plight. They recalled how they had started out as timid teenagers, often feeling powerless in a world that demanded bravado. They remembered how Master Lee's guidance transformed them into confident adults who knew the value of humility. But there were obstacles. The legal route was complicated, and Chuck realized they needed public support. Therefore, he began organizing a community meeting. Word spread quickly through the local neighborhood. People who had no direct connection to martial arts still admired Chuck's name, so they showed up out of curiosity but stayed because they felt something deeper. They felt that pulling down a historic cornerstone of their community was wrong. The meeting took place in a cramped library, where the air conditioning hummed in the corner. Chuck stood at the front and explained that preserving Master Lee's dojo meant preserving more than just four walls. It was about protecting a legacy of respect, discipline, and moral fiber that had shaped countless lives. Some voices in the crowd argued that a new commercial center would bring more revenue. But others pointed out that intangible heritage sometimes outweighed short-term profit. Chuck spoke in a measured tone. He was not interested in making the developers into villains, but he was determined that if the building was truly beyond repair, they should at least consider relocating the dojo or preserving its essence. Yet that wasn't enough for him. He wanted the original structure to remain standing. He knew the historical significance extended far beyond personal memories. Rumor had it that the earliest immigrants who settled the area had built the framework, so the building's beams carried stories of perseverance from another time. Therefore, Chuck insisted that the city council at least hear them out. A local reporter named Samantha caught wind of the story and sensed an angle that could resonate with readers. She arrived to interview Chuck and Master Lee on the dojo's training floor, with a single camera operator at her side. She asked them about the importance of preserving what some people dismissed as an aging relic. Chuck told her that every generation faces a choice between erasing the past and building on it. He believed that old structures served as anchors of identity. Samantha was intrigued by the sincerity in his words. She captured a few segments for her news piece, and she left promising to air it that very evening. That broadcast hit local TV, prompting a flurry of social media chatter. People recognized Chuck Norris immediately, but they also appreciated Master Lee's quiet dignity. An online petition emerged, calling for a halt to the demolition. It gathered hundreds of signatures overnight, then thousands by the next afternoon. The city council started feeling some pressure, but the developers were not about to surrender. They argued that their project would breathe new economic life into a struggling part of town. They also pointed out that Master Lee had fallen behind on property taxes, meaning the city could raise funds by welcoming new development. Chuck realized that logic, so he worked behind the scenes to raise money to cover Master Lee's outstanding debts. A few philanthropic individuals, plus some successful former students, chipped in substantial donations. They told Chuck that they remembered how Master Lee had once let them train for free when they couldn't afford the fees. He never turned away a dedicated pupil, and that generosity had shaped their approach to life and business. But the clock was ticking. The official demolition date loomed, and the local authorities still had the green light to move forward unless some legal maneuver put a stop to it. Chuck turned to a longtime friend, Casey, who happened to be an attorney specialized in historic preservation. Casey drove down from another state to meet Chuck at the dojo. He walked around the structure, examined old photographs, studied original building permits, and discovered that the dojo sat on land that once housed a community meeting hall. That meant there might be a loophole allowing it to be classified as a historic site. They prepared documents, filed for a temporary injunction, and waited anxiously for a hearing. During that waiting period, Chuck knew they needed to rally the neighborhood. He suggested organizing a martial arts exhibition right outside the dojo to spark public interest. Master Lee hesitated, stating that he was too old to put on a public display, but he agreed it could help. Therefore, they prepared a lineup featuring local practitioners who had once passed through the dojo's doors. On the evening of the exhibition, a makeshift stage was set up in the dojo's small parking lot. Colorful lights draped around the edges, and a modest sound system crackled with anticipation. Curious families gathered, drawn by the promise of seeing Chuck Norris in action, or at least hearing him speak. Yet Chuck chose to stand humbly on the sidelines for most of the demonstrations, letting the younger generation showcase their skills. He wanted everyone to see that this place was more than just a battered building. It was a living testament to how martial arts could shape character, give confidence to the insecure, or instill hope in the hopeless. Master Lee sat near the front, his posture straight despite his years, and he watched with a keen eye. He nodded approval each time a participant executed a disciplined kata or displayed a refined series of kicks. Chuck caught him smiling softly, recalling how many novices he had personally taught on that very floor, how many hours they had spent honing techniques that demanded respect for tradition. Some onlookers were amazed to discover that even though Master Lee's finances had crumbled, his influence was still strong and vital. The crowd included local shop owners, teachers, firefighters, and all manner of townspeople, many of whom had never set foot inside a dojo but were suddenly moved by the sense of unity unfolding before them. Several performed impromptu donations to the fundraiser jar by the entrance. Samantha from the local news showed up again to film the event. By the time the last demonstration concluded, the night sky sparkled with stars, and the applause was thunderous. Chuck walked up to the microphone at the edge of the makeshift stage, facing the crowd that had grown to nearly 200 people. He cleared his throat and spoke with quiet passion, explaining how the building was more than just Master Li's livelihood. He framed it as a beacon of tradition in a rapidly changing world, a place that had welcomed people from all walks of life. He reminded everyone that the building's longevity symbolized the unbroken chain of lessons passed from teacher to student, generation after generation. He urged them to continue supporting the cause, whether by sharing the story online or showing up at the hearing to demonstrate community solidarity. The crowd erupted in cheers. Master Li bowed deeply, tears glimmering once again in his eyes. The excitement from that event spread across social media overnight. A local newspaper wrote an editorial questioning whether the city was neglecting its cultural heritage by allowing bulldozers to roll in. The developers responded with a statement about their philanthropic track record, insisting their vision for new construction would create jobs. But more and more voices questioned if those jobs were worth demolishing something irreplaceable. Chuck realized the power of public perception. He scheduled an appointment with the mayor, an official named Terrence who prided himself on being in touch with the community. Chuck arrived at City Hall and was greeted by a polite assistant. Terrence welcomed him warmly, acknowledging Chuck's decades of achievements. But Terrence also stressed that the city needed economic rejuvenation. Chuck listened carefully, then explained that tearing down that dojo would erase a piece of local identity. He showed Terrence a set of old photographs, Master Li standing alongside city leaders from decades ago, a group of uniformed youth from a community outreach program, the building's exterior through several eras of paint jobs and signage. Each photo told a story that extended beyond bricks and mortar. Terrence promised to review any new evidence that might grant a historical designation or at least provide a reprieve for Master Li's property tax burdens. Chuck left City Hall feeling a surge of optimism. He phoned Master Li to give him an update but also cautioned that nothing was certain yet. Time was still running short, and the legal system could be slow. Therefore, Chuck and Casey poured their energy into preparing for the impending hearing. On the day of the hearing, the county courthouse bustled with lawyers, developers, local residents, and the occasional curious observer. Master Li arrived dressed in a simple suit, looking distinctly out of his element in a setting of polished shoes and rigid benches. Chuck stood beside him, occasionally leaning in to reassure him that no matter what happened, they had given it their best shot. A line of people showed up to speak during the public comment session. One after another, they told stories about how the dojo had changed their lives, how Master Li had taught them not only martial arts but also self-respect and empathy. Some community members explained that the building was an enduring symbol of their neighborhood's resilience. Casey presented evidence of the dojo's historical significance, highlighting that it had once served as a meeting hall for immigrant families establishing a foothold in America. The developer's legal team countered by arguing that the building's condition was beyond salvage, that local businesses would benefit from new construction, and that Master Li should not stand in the way of progress. They insisted that bulldozing was the fastest route to economic gain. The presiding judge, a stern-faced woman named Marcia, listened intently. Chuck felt a ripple of nerves when the developers concluded their statement. But Master Li rose to speak at the final moment, his hands trembling slightly. He talked about what the dojo meant to him personally. He recalled how Chuck's mentor had once told him that a building never dies if the spirit inside it remains strong. He described years of sweat, tears, and triumph that had seeped into the floors. He spoke with a soft voice that commanded respect in the silent courtroom. Even the developers seemed to pause. When the hearing ended, Judge Marcia took the documents, indicated she would consider all sides, and announced she would deliver a ruling within 2 days. The next 48 hours felt like an eternity. Chuck tried to keep busy, dropping by the dojo to help fix what he could. He hammered nails into loose floorboards. He replaced a broken window pane. He swept layers of dust from corners that hadn't seen a broom in years. Master Li hovered nearby, occasionally shaking his head with an amused smile. He teased Chuck about how the student had become the caretaker, but Chuck just laughed lightly, saying it was only fair he repay a small fraction of the kindness he had received here. Word of the impending court decision circulated throughout the city. Even casual observers who rarely watch local news found themselves curious about whether the underdog would triumph. The developers clearly felt the momentum shifting, because they released a statement proposing a compromise. They would incorporate a small martial arts studio into their development plans to honor the dojo. That might have been enough for some, but Chuck believed it was a half measure that destroyed the original building's authenticity. He suspected Master Lee felt the same way. Though the dojo needed repairs, Master Lee wanted those walls to stand as a testament to the history etched into them. Late in the evening, Chuck retreated to a quiet spot behind the dojo. A patch of grass overlooked a chain-link fence. He remembered training sessions under moonlight when Master Lee would speak cryptic words about harnessing inner calm. Chuck closed his eyes. He felt that same peace stirring inside him now. The next day arrived with a sense of electrified suspense. People gathered outside the courthouse to await the ruling. Samantha from the local news positioned her camera crew in front of the building, describing the local tension to viewers. Chuck, Master Lee, and Casey arrived early, slipping into the courtroom. The developers were seated on the other side, their polished shoes tapping against the floor in subdued impatience. Finally, Judge Marcia entered and took her seat. She cleared her throat, scanned the paperwork, and began to read her prepared statement. Chuck felt his heart pound. She explained that while she sympathized with the developer's desire for progress, the evidence indicated that the structure had verifiable historical significance and was worthy of protection under local preservation statutes. Therefore, demolition would be prohibited until a thorough historical review could be completed, and should that review confirm the property's eligibility, it would be placed on a historical register. The hearing room erupted into a mix of cheers and groans. Master Lee clasped Chuck's hand in relieved gratitude. The developers exchanged frustrated glances, but the legal ruling was clear. A local reporter hurried forward to ask Chuck for a statement, but he deferred to Master Lee, who spoke softly but firmly. He said that the dojo's heart would remain open to anyone seeking to learn discipline, respect, and self-worth. Outside the courthouse, a crowd waited anxiously. When Chuck stepped out and flashed a rare, triumphant grin, the gathering erupted in applause. Samantha filmed the moment, capturing Chuck lifting Master Lee's arm in celebration. People surged around them, and local residents began chanting Master Lee's name, revealing the depth of appreciation that had been hidden until it was threatened. Over the following weeks, Chuck and Casey helped Master Lee navigate the paperwork required to secure the dojo's official recognition as a historical site. They arranged for volunteer carpenters and electricians to step in and make much-needed repairs. Former students who had become skilled tradespeople offered their services at reduced rates, or even free of charge. Families chipped in to repaint the exterior. That old building took on fresh life without losing its nostalgic character. More visitors started dropping by, some curious about the legend of Chuck's involvement, others fascinated by the sense of community that had ignited around saving this dojo. Master Lee, for his part, displayed renewed energy. He guided each volunteer, occasionally reminiscing about the times he had taught them years ago. New students signed up for classes, and local newspapers covered the revival of a place once on the brink of oblivion. Chuck found himself swept up in the sense of purpose that radiated from every corner of the property. He spent long hours there, sometimes just listening to Master Lee's stories, sometimes helping tidy up. But eventually, the day came when Master Lee said the time had arrived for Chuck to step back into his own life. Chuck laughed, explaining that he never intended to stay forever, but he wanted to ensure everything was stable first. Master Lee simply nodded and handed Chuck a small wooden token with an inscription that read, "Through struggle, we preserve what matters." Chuck carried that token with him when he finally departed. On his last evening at the dojo, Chuck watched a class of bright-eyed teenagers practicing forms on the newly polished floors. The setting sun streamed through the repaired windows, casting warm light across the room. He noticed how the teens beamed with pride each time Master Lee or one of the advanced instructors offered a word of praise. He realized that the dojo's mission would continue, that the spirit of his late mentor would live on in every student who walked through those doors. Therefore, he felt a deep sense of closure. The next morning, He packed his bag, said his farewells, and drove off with a quiet smile. He left behind a carefully arranged framework that would keep Master Lee's dojo safe for the foreseeable future. The story quickly spread online, capturing the imagination of people across the country who loved tales about standing up for history and tradition. The city ended up encouraging other business owners to explore ways to revitalize older buildings instead of demolishing them. Master Lee's dojo became a shining example that sometimes preserving the past can unify a community and teach lessons that remain vital in the present. Chuck, driving along a quiet highway as the sun rose, felt a surge of pride. He passed countless miles of suburban sprawl but carried with him the certainty that one corner of that sprawl would remain distinct because the old ways still mattered to those who remembered them. He thought about how his late mentor's lessons were preserved in the building's beams, and how they would continue echoing for generations to come. But as he turned on the radio and drove toward his next destination, he couldn't help feeling that the real treasure was the spark of community that had emerged. The memory of cheering crowds outside the courthouse, of kids clapping thunderously at the dojo exhibition, of Master Lee's trembling hands as he gazed upon the place he had tended for decades. Those images blended into one powerful reflection of what people could accomplish if they chose to value more than just profit. Therefore, Chuck felt reassured that he had done right by his mentor's memory and by the place that had shaped him. However, he also knew that life had a way of throwing new challenges at anyone who dared to stand up for something worthwhile. He laughed softly and wondered what adversity might lie around the next bend, because he was more than ready to meet it. It was that unbreakable resolve that defined him, and anyone who witnessed this battle to save Master Lee's dojo now understood that Chuck Norris wasn't simply a legend of action. He was a guardian of legacies that might otherwise vanish unnoticed. But this journey was far from over, and that made him smile even more. He barreled down the highway, the wooden token resting on the passenger seat as a reminder of everything he had fought for. Therefore, he pressed forward, determined that every new sunrise would bring another chance to preserve something meaningful. Now it's time for everyone following this story to join the legacy, so hit that subscribe button right now and stay alert for the next epic tale of Chuck Norris on this channel.